Hello and welcome to another Jackman Radio live stream. I'm your host, Mike Jackman, and I am joined today by filmmaker, researcher, and independent talking head, Mr. Jason Bermas. Bermas, how you doing, man?
I'm doing extra well, man. I'm pushing forward no matter what. I'm living my life. I'm smiling. Just my birthday this weekend. Did a little family time with my girlfriend and her daughter out on the Great Mississippi River. And I feel blessed. I'm 43 years young, certainly not a spring chicken anymore. But I feel as vibrant and energetic as ever, despite the fact that we are, in this country at least, living in the most authoritarian and Orwellian times of our lives.
Yeah, it's kind of beyond, isn't it? Obviously, we first met each other in 2006, and the thumbnail photo was a photo of us young and bushy-tailed back in 2007 at a Ron Paul event in Manchester, New Hampshire.
And you know what? Congratulations on just doing a great job with Ron Paul. I was thinking about that before the broadcast because, Ron Paul is kind of, I don't like to idolize anybody, but I'm not afraid to say that I admire people or I look up to them, right? And this is a guy that helped people through the medical profession, pretty selfless gig, had a large family, okay, still married to his wife, still very physically fit for an elderly gentleman, somebody who got into government, challenged the system on a level where the system, many of which in the media are still in power today. You want to fawn over Sean Hannity. He's the guy that was pushing Paul-tard bullshiz all the way back when that Ron Paul revolution was really taking off during that 2008 campaign. And, I hearken all the way back to 2007 when I got to interview Dr. Paul when he was up there against some of the still very heavy-hitting political players of today that include people like Rudy Giuliani. You can't watch Fox News without seeing a Mike Huckabee commercial. And in my opinion, absolutely dominated them. So if there's like a life that I want to kind of model myself after, both career-wise and family-wise, that's the guy I look to. Because when he retired from politics, what did he do? He starts the Ron Paul Institute. He'd always had the newsletter, but now he streams all the time. He's still influential through that. His son, love him or hate him, is still one of the most fearless, if not the most fearless person in the United States Senate right now. So, hats off to him and hats off to you guys for doing just an amazing job yesterday with that interview. I was envious.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that, Bermas. Yeah, that was a long time in the works. That was like a top 5 dream guest for myself to podcast with. And like you said, man, you don't want to idolize, especially politicians. But as Jesse Ventura says, Jason, I don't consider Ron Paul a politician. I consider him a statesman like me.
I love the impersonations, brother.
Yeah,
Ventura, he went a little bit off the deep end, but I'll always appreciate what he did for 9/11 truth and just kind of putting it out there that he may run for president and being the spoiler, right? Every time he did that, he did a little less in 2020 and 2016, but certainly 2012, it was a possibility. And I don't have to agree with all the guy's policies or politics.
No.
He was anti-establishment, and I believe he still is. It's just like I watch Russell Brand, right? And I've been watching Russell Brand for years, on and off. He's gained a huge following now that he's talking more and more of the subjects that I myself talk about. And he had Noam Chomsky on, right? And Chomsky, recently was pro-authoritarianism via the COVID-19 84 shots, period. He basically said, you don't have a right to be a part of society if you're not going to do what the state tells you. And, a lot of people who had been diehard Chomskyites, even on the left, because they try to paint this as a right-left issue. No, it's a bodily autonomy issue. And really, when you looked at people that were raising concerns about shots, medications, things like SSRIs, everything in the medical field, pre-Trump era, right? It was vastly left and vastly Democrats, right?
Yeah, against Big Pharma.
And even Chomsky, who I have so many issues with, 9/11 being a huge one, came on his program, I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, and discussed how we are living in the most authoritarian times in this country. And even when the Soviets had control of Russia via post-World War II into the Cold War era, the people were still able to access German television, the BBC, the other side of the story. And he pointed out, you can no longer do that in this country. They took away RT. You can't watch Chris Hedges. It doesn't matter that Larry King ended his career there. And,
that was crazy what they did to Abby Martin and Lee Camp, just erasing hundreds of episodes and really thousands of hours of really great content. And obviously they got their funding from Russia, but Abby said it, Jesse and Tyrell Ventura both said it, Lee Camp, they were never told by like a governing board or by anybody what to say or not to say. And Abby in her show, Breaking the Set, was even critical of, Putin and what was going on with Ukraine and what they were doing before she quit. So, yeah, I mean, it's every country. I mean, look at the BBC. That's their organ. And look at NPR or anything here in America. Really, that's not just the organ of the state, but it's the mouthpiece for the revolving door between the state and the corporate interests and the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex. So,
absolutely. And let me paint a really ironic picture for folks. I've been doing this a very long time, as you know. And I like to think that I'm pretty well educated on biomedical tyranny, the type of human experimentation that we talk about, not only in this country, but beyond. Tuskegee is the large talking point. But whenever that's brought up, I often say, they were taking basically mentally retarded children back in the 50s and 60s in New York hospitals, and they were injecting them with cancer viruses, among other things, pre-MKUltra and those type of experiments. And how am I going to incorporate this into RT? Well, the last day they were on, I'm there, I'm at night, and I just happen to be on YouTube, and I'm trying to go to bed, and RT comes up, and they're running documentaries on the RT channel. It's RT Live on YouTube. And they're running a documentary called Death Factories on Unit 731, which, if you're not familiar with and your audience is not familiar with, this is the pre-World War II human experimentation program run by Japan. And they are interviewing what you could only talk about as the same type of ilk as a Joseph Mengele. In other words, they're talking to the surviving members of the program that directed the program and carried out the experiments. They're not in jail. They didn't serve any time. There were no Nuremberg hearings for them. And they are talking extremely frankly about how they killed everybody. Let me repeat that for you. No one survived. We're talking about tens of thousands of human beings per doctor. And the way that they're, and I'm sitting there watching this thing, and I'm thinking, like, how did I miss this? So as I'm watching it, I'm on my little phone, and I type in Unit 731, and lo and behold, there's a Guardian article out there just from the past couple of years when it gets declassified. So this had been hidden, I think, till about 2018, 2019, before it was actually talked about publicly. And they're talking to this doctor, and they're asking him, well, how could you do this? And what would happen after one experiment? What would you do with that person if they survived? And he goes, first of all, we didn't even consider them human beings. Okay, a lot of them came in from China. And in the reference material, in other words, the paperwork that they would write up, they would actually refer to these people as logs. All right. Now, for those that don't know, one of the big contentions about World War II and what these programs were all about via the Nazis is that for instance, in their paperwork, they never said they were doing human experimentation. They were always saying they were working on animals or pigs. And one of the people that came forward, in one of the very few survivors, was actually, I believe it was a Lutheran preacher. This is all documented in Operation Paperclip, the Annie Jacobson book, which is a must read if you want to learn about the military-industrial complex. And
she does amazing work.
The best.
Yeah. I'm reading her book right now, Paperclip.
It's incredible. I have it on audiobook, and there are some times that you're taken back. And people should also understand that, a lot of the human experimentation that was going on there were through the Nazi vaccine programs, because they were looking for a bioweapon that they could use against their enemies, but at the same time spare their own populace by inoculating them first. Okay, so that all these human beings were basically being injected with these experimental vaccines that would protect them from the bioweapons that they were developing. However, this, and you'll get to it in the book, this Lutheran priest had survived what is known as the ice water experiments. And what they were trying to do is, a lot of the German planes were being shot down over the ocean. And these pilots would be surviving, but then they would die of hypothermia or sometimes be frozen. So this is really almost where cryogenics comes from. They were trying to figure out how they could resuscitate, or if they could resuscitate, a body once it went into this frozen state, basically bringing people back from the dead. And this Lutheran priest was like one of the sole survivors of that. So when they went to the place where these experiments were taking place, again, the paperwork said that they were working on pigs, and yet the cases that they were putting them in were human-sized. They were human-sized, and this is what they did. So, I looked at that and I was just like, oh my God, they were covering it up. And the same thing was true with the Japanese. They always had code words in order to protect themselves from the war crimes that they knew they were committing.
Right. Yeah. And it's not unique just to the United States. Obviously, we exported a lot of that over through Operation Paperclip. And it's really evil to think about. In the part of the Jacobson book I'm in, I forget his name, but he was one of the ranking Nazis who was involved in running, basically, like, think about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. He was running a mine where he had, basically slaves working night and day, working to death. And he was one of the
guys.
I'd have to go back and look at it. I don't remember the exact name, but we brought that guy over through Paperclip and turned him into a United States government employee. And he lived out a really nice, comfortable life for years. Many of them did. So, and you're talking about that doctor talking about the experiments he was doing. It reminds me of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. I mean, got to live an old, dying old man. Never really, talked about what he did with his, when he directed MKUltra, but the ability to just kind of, I'm just a farmer. I get up in the morning and I feed the chickens and the cows, and we have a nice time. And by the way, I conducted mind control experiments and dosed hundreds, maybe thousands of people unwittingly or against their will, for the better part of 2 decades with complete funding from the United States government. So it is crazy.
Let me say this about that. I brought up MKUltra this week because I think it's so important, with the SSRI news, right? That is not making headlines like it should in the United States. However, again, you got to give the Tuck credit. I did a broadcast yesterday with John Fitch where we were talking about this new bombshell report that cites 17 different studies over the past decade or so showing there's no efficacy that these antipsychotics, these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, do anything to stop depression. That there's a chemical imbalance, or the chemical imbalance in your brain causes this stuff, right? And we brought up the fact that Tom Cruise had challenged Matt Lauer.
I remember that. That's classic.
It's amazing. You can say what you want about Tom Cruise. He was spot mother trucking on that one. So I sit back, I watch that, we do our segment, and I also point out to John, I go, these SSRIs were also developed during MKUltra. That's what they don't tell you. So the only reason that we know that this program was so vast and went well beyond what they tried to talk about in the hearings was that we started getting receipts that were supposed to be destroyed to different universities and pharmaceutical companies.
There were some boxes of documents that were found.
So you would find that there was this money moving through Harvard or what would become these big pharma corporations. And it just so happens that a lot of these mind control drugs, if you will, were also being used at Jonestown, post MKUltra as well. And Big Pharma had a huge vested interest in these drugs. And, you know, you can look at the charts, man. They're all, you know, depression hasn't gone down. The suicide rate has gone up 30+% since we started instituting these type of drugs and programs. And I'd like to remind people, we are one of the only countries, if not the only first world country, that allows for television to advertise these things on television at an alarming pace. You can't sit down to any news station or any cable station owned by Viacom or otherwise, especially at nighttime, and every commercial break, you're getting at least 2 pharmaceutical commercials, at least 2, if they don't dominate the whole thing. And that alone should be outlawed. If these things were really about your health, it would be between you and your doctor. Instead, it's about marketing and mass mind control. And once again, Tom Cruise nailed it, saying the whole chemical imbalance is totally Johnny nonsense, that we should not have kids on Ritalin. You know, at one point, Lauer says something about kids on Ritalin, and he goes, Matt, kids on Ritalin? Matt, you're glib, Matt. You're glib.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Cruise is the best, dude. Napather's the best. Oh, I love the new Top Gun, man. I know it's a commercial for the you know, the Navy and the Air Force, but I still thought it was entertaining. It can be both things. It can be a great piece of propaganda, but can also be a great piece of art. You know, why not?
What I found really interesting, and Annie Jacobson tweeted about this, but immediately she was the first person I thought of 15 minutes, 10 minutes into the film. So for those that haven't seen it, I'm going to give you a little spoiler, but honestly, it'll be a good spoiler and you'll be looking for it. In the very, very beginning, you have the Tom Cruise character that's going to be testing out a new plane, right? And they're telling him the program's done. It's all about the drone warfare. We don't need you, human beings. No. But, you know, he's a rebel and he's going to do it. So he walks in to the plane. And this is after he does all these exercises before he can get in there. They show him with the air tank on his face and he's running, and then they show him in a chamber. This is straight out of Area 51 and the Oxcart program. Okay. And this is a Lockheed Martin program that they were doing at Area 51 and the other subdivisions, where they were trying to create a spy plane that could go 60,000 feet in the air. And that's why, you know, I constantly go, who gives a flying rat's ass about Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, or Elon Musk's space rides that are doing the same damn thing?
You know, those are the ones they make Amazon shows about, though. Those are the ones that you hear about. You got Shatner in there going up to space, coming back, babbling like a little baby, and you know, that's like the front. That's the infomercial.
Yes, and you know what? Shatner right now is heading up a contest where you can go to space, just like Inspiration 4 had the Space Force contest. It's a joke.
Amazing.
Folks.
It's amazing.
So
it's amazing, bro. It's so good.
You see the Oxcart program in this book, and as he first of all, part of the Oxcart program was you would have to do that. You'd have to go through 2 to 6 hours of prep before you could even fly these things with the equipment, because your body wouldn't be able to handle the G-forces, and you couldn't breathe, basically. So I'm watching this. I'm like, oh, they're doing this. Then he walks into the plane, and there's a cartoon skunk on the tail. And immediately I'm like, oh, they're talking about Skunk Works.
Skunk Works, yeah.
As he gets into the plane to take off, the handle says Lockheed Martin on it. So you look at this and I'm like, I'm glad he slipped that little bit of history in there. And, they kind of made it into a generic United States enemy. It was probably Iran without saying Iran, right? That they were the NATO nuclear threat. It was pro-NATO.
Of course.
Pro-U.S. imperialism.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the 80s, it was clearly the Russians or the Chinese, although they didn't in the 86 film. They also, the director, was it Tony Scott, didn't implicitly say who it was, but you can surmise, and then fast forward to 2022, you can surmise who it is.
Exactly.
Who has that kind of weaponry.
But it fits in, and it went back with that 80s style for sure. It was a good movie. It was a fun ride.
They hit all the right notes, man.
Well, we watched the original the night before, and I have like a little home theater. I'm big on the projectors. Forget about buying TVs, guys. They're a waste of money. You get yourself a nice little projector, and all of a sudden you got like a 200-inch screen on tap. And you can get one of the, I had like this mini one that's about this big that still does like 720p amazingly, like 100 inches. So, we had the movie theater experience before we went there, and we kind of watched it, and it showed its age, right? But then instead of going just like that Star Wars reboot route where you could tell they had to remake everything and hit every note, they kind of slyly, threw in the dudes with abs on the beach. They're not playing volleyball. They're playing flag football, right? And they still fit it in. And that's the kind of cheesy, corn pop Hollywood stuff that, not that I can get behind, but I can sit back and enjoy, right? And not think about it for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the scene, spoiler alert, between him and Val Kilmer. I mean, he lost his voice in real life, and they've used some kind of really weird Darth Vader type technology to recreate his voice, and that's what they did in the film. But that was a cool scene too, man. I mean, this is the stuff we grew up on, and obviously the people and the entities who make these films know that, and they play upon that. Of course, everything you see on the screen is carefully constructed. As Stanley Kubrick pointed out, that an editor and a director has control over literally every second and every frame of a film. So it's there for a reason. But switching gears, I kind of wanted to get your take on Ghislaine Maxwell's transfer down to Tallahassee to FCI. What's the deal behind that? What do you think?
Great question.
What are you hearing?
And a lot of people love to take a big hot steaming dump on the Daily Mail because the Daily Mail is a bit of a tabloid. They've
got the goods though, man. And then I wanted to touch on Franklin, man. They just ran a whole piece about Franklin. So
they are by far the best media aggregator in the mainstream. First of all, let's just say that they are bar none. I go to the Daily Mail more than anything. That's where they had the headline about the SSRIs. They always link to the original article. If it's a rewrite, if they're covering, for instance, a medical paper, they always link to that. It doesn't mean I think they get it right all the time. I want to say that right now. But on top of that, they also do the best exclusive work in the mainstream media. Not even close. I want to say it again. It's not even close in the world of Western journalism. Let's just go over a handful of the stories that they've broken over the last 18 to 24 months that nobody else dared to touch. Number one, they just broke this story. Okay. No other media outlet had even whispered the fact that now Ghislaine Maxwell was going to be put in a situation where she wasn't going to be protected. She's going to be in this Florida prison among other inmates. She can teach yoga if she wants. She can learn plumbing and cooking. And
it's a low security situation, Jason.
So now all these inmates have access to her. The Daily Mail, I believe, was the first one to report on the fact that her lawyers in court had said that another inmate had actually been offered money to kill her in terms of it would be worth the extra time, somewhere in the amount of $1 million, according to the lawyer, right?
That was Tartiglione in drag, right? Post-op.
It might have been. Maybe they transferred him too.
Remember that joke we made?
That woman, he's
when Ghislaine got arrested, we were like, "Oh, her roommate is Tartiglione in a wig," but it's in the female section.
So you have that story. They again, they were one of the only people to report on the fact that Epstein's lawyer had said that Epstein in the first suicide attempt was actually strangled by Tartiglione. Again, they reported that. They were the first, and as far as I know, still the only Western journalism outlet to confirm that the Hunter Biden laptop material is real. They ran the Jack Maxey story. They sent their guy out there to authenticate it. When the Jack Maxey files hit the torrentverse and the 4chan world, they were one of the only outlets to cover it.
Well, the New York Post, too. I got to give credit to the New York Post because Facebook and other entities totally censored that story, and they had it right.
Yeah, well, Post had it at the very beginning, for sure. Yeah. But did the New York Post send one of their journalists out there with Jack Maxey?
Oh, I doubt
it. They got sent. The New York Post got sent among a dozen other of these outlets, all the files. They all got sent them, and no one touched it. You know who touched it? Daily Mail touched it. All right. And now you get to, this story out of nowhere, which happens to be published. I believe it's the weekend that the Bohemian Grove actually kicks off. Right now, I'm not really sure. I've looked up everything I can aside from calling the Grove itself and then trying to get an answer. There's no mainstream coverage whatsoever. I believe it was the Santa Barbara Press or Chronicle. We covered it here. There was one local article basically saying that this thing was taking place, but not who was showing up this year or anything of that nature. The reason I bring that up with the Franklin scandal, and I know that you've got both books with you. Here's the one I've got. This is the Nick Bryant follow-up. And
I got them both there, Burmas.
Yes.
And you had Nick Bryant on recently, didn't you?
Yeah, I've had him on a couple times. For those that don't know, Nick Bryant was also the person who got a hold of the Epstein Black Book. And once again,
Gawker printed it.
Yeah, no media outlets would touch it. He went to a bunch of them. This is a guy that's written for Rolling Stone and a variety of other mainstream outlets. It was Gawker, like you said, that published it. But there is an account at the Bohemian Grove that involves, dark ritualistic abuse of children. It coincides with this horrific moment of not only snuff and child sex abuse, but filming that, of course. It's just one of the hardest hitting parts of the book. And all of a sudden, the Daily Mail is doing an extensive article about Conspiracy of Silence, the never aired documentary that was supposed to be on, I believe it was the Discovery Channel, and that was entered into evidence once it was mailed to DeCamp in unfinished form in the civil case against Lawrence King, who is basically the main pimp in this narrative. And he loses the case. And he also did some criminal time for, other
the money, not related to the trafficking, but to something financial.
Yes, and that's why we talk about it as the Franklin scandal, because this was actually going through it was a credit union and not a bank, this Franklin Credit Union that he seemed to be running and doing all sorts of nefarious things in. So I had seen this documentary before I read the books. It's what prompted me to read the books, right?
Same here.
Anybody can see this thing. And once again, this was the turning point for me. This was the point where it wasn't just about 9/11, okay? And it just wasn't about world government or an elite cabal of globalists that wanted to, basically unify the world under one governance and one rule. This was the power structure and their minions sexually abusing children and being into the occult on a level I didn't think was imaginable. I thought it was the stuff of Stephen King novels and horror movies. And
it's worse than anything. It's worse than anything Stephen King could ever dream up, because it's real. And in DeCamp's book, which came out first before Nick Bryant's, they really go into the stories from the victims, and Alicia Owen and Troy Bonner, and of course Paul Bonacci. Those are three names. Those are actual victims. There's court documents. There's their testimony. And the New York Times, to my knowledge, has never apologized for calling it a giant hoax. just like they've never apologized for lying about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So it's shameful because, you know, a lot of people want to try and tie this to the QAnon sense, as you call it. But whenever someone brings up Q to me, I direct them towards the Franklin scandal to start there, because it has the DNA and the fabric of what would later be the whole Epstein story. And it's real. It's verifiable. There's actual victims that testified. And if you just look at how Alicia Owen was treated, what she was facing, what happened to Troy Bonner and his brother, what happened to Gary Caradori, the state investigator whose plane was obviously tampered with, who was killed, him and his son in his plane crash that occurred when he was going to meet with one of the photographers in this blackmail ring and get that compromise. I mean, it's all right there. Anyone can look it up. You know, if you read these books and you watch Conspiracy of Silence and you look at the work Nick Bryant has done even since then, it's invaluable.
And you know, one of the things that we really focused in on when Nick and I spoke recently was the DC aspect of this. Because if you watch Conspiracy of Silence,
Craig Spence.
Yeah, well, the vast majority of what you're seeing is taking place via Boys Town and Nebraska. And it's only really the last 15 minutes, 10 minutes or so, where they get into the aspect that goes to DC and into the White House directly. So in my film, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, I decided not to so much focus on the Franklin scandal itself, but the Barney Frank aspect and the DC part of that ring. And we had a rather large discussion about, I believe it was Frank Joby. I call him Stephen Goby in my film, because I think some of the media had gotten it wrong at that point. But for those that don't know who Frank Joby or Stephen Goby, depending on what he's going by, he was a male prostitute who was running a part of that call boy ring out of Barney Frank's DC apartment. And he was on Barney Frank's payroll as his assistant. So this ring also extended beyond just Barney Frank's apartment in DC and into the local Chevy Chase Elementary School, where it was apparent that some of these prostitutes were doing their business at the school itself, and the principal was involved. The principal didn't do any jail time. He just resigned. Oh, I sure hope that didn't happen. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, I'm sure you do. It's just like Foley during the Hassert era, and it comes out later, a judge literally labels Dennis Hassert, somebody who was the longest serving Republican Speaker of the House in history at the time, a serial child molester who had been doing this for decades, all the way back in the day when he was a gym teacher and wrestling coach. You think these people stopped? No. So back to Foley, you know, all of this.
And Foley, who was a congressman, to the audience who's not sure who you're talking about.
Now in Florida, I believe.
Yeah, Florida, a congressman in Florida who was involved with passing an anti-child abuse law with John Walsh from America's Most Wanted.
And he was portrayed as
these people hide
the children.
Right in plain sight.
Yeah, in fact, the clip that we use in Invisible Empire to show this is him being on Chris Hansen's television program, the Have a Seat guy. And by the way, Chris Hansen, you're knocking it out of the flipping park. I love that Chris Hansen has basically left the mainstream media, is doing his own thing, is one of the only people out there talking about the Peter Nygard case. And you notice, folks, the media turned on his ass.
Of course they did. Yeah, he's been relegated, to his own YouTube channel or something, or just obviously scaled back something a lot smaller.
Yes.
And of course, you know who promoted Nygard? Oprah. Just like she promoted John of God, and just like she promoted all the other billionaire class. You know,
Harvey Weinstein, all that good stuff. Go Oprah, part of the good guys club. But
he's my White House projectionist, Jason. He did a great job. Me and Hillary used to eat popcorn with Harvey, watching movies in the White House.
Yeah. We used to go, we had the projectionist come with us. Yeah.
So I think this is probably why we don't have the client list. Maxwell has not released the client list, and she's eligible to be released in 2037. That's only 15 years from now. And if she doesn't get murked in there, she could very well be released.
So let's talk about this client list thing, because it's almost become a meme to me, right? Like I hate calling it the client list, because that's not how I feel like it worked, right?
Well, yeah, you're right, because this was a child abuse ring is what we should be calling it.
Well, here's the thing. I've gone over the multitude of evidence that was photographed at, say, the mansion in New York, raided in Palm Beach, and then some of the stuff that they submitted via the island, right? And they showed you this vast amount of binders where they even blacked out the ring on the end, so you couldn't see what they were marked, right? Forget about telling you what's in these binders or even what they had them labeled, right? Those binders are full of not a client list, in my opinion, but pictures that would incriminate high-level pedophiles. That's one, okay? That's one. So forget about client lists. Let's stop with the Johnny nonsense. They showed you he had boxes of Maxter hard drives. Let me repeat. So for those that don't understand how a DVR system works, a basic one that you can go buy right now online or in a store, just like your computer, they have these large hard disks in them, and they automatically record. This guy had the hard disks in a bin, in the same bin where you saw burned DVDs and burned CDs that also hold anywhere, if it's a CD, 700 megabytes. If it's a DVD, 4.7 to 9 plus gigabytes of information, depending on the format. So we have all that. Okay. We know there were pictures in the safe. They didn't put any of those into evidence whatsoever. Nick Bryant and the Black Book, that's one of many black books. Like David Rockefeller was extra meticulous with all of his meetings, had his own little Dewey Decimal System. Epstein was, when he wasn't abusing children, when he didn't have, throughout the day, was making calls on the Rolodex, being a middleman, arranging things. So there are going to be people, in his contacts that never abused a child. Let's be honest. Okay. There are going to be the sort of people that take some of these abuse victims after their children. For instance, we have that media report, and so many people were in denial that Epstein and Trump even had a relationship. I was not one of those people. I was one of the people speaking out saying, listen, we may not have flight records that Trump was on Epstein's plane. We know Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were on Trump's plane. And let's not forget, he wished her well. I wish her well, Frank.
Jason, I don't know her that well. Maybe we saw each other a few times because we both lived down in West Palm Beach. But quite frankly, I wish her well.
I wish her well. So the media report I'm discussing is that, and anybody could look this up. I'm not saying it's true, but I'm not putting it out of the realm of possibility, that Epstein threw a party with over 20 women. Okay, these are of age women that included Melania Trump. Okay, and this was the audition for his third wife. And that would very much make sense, because if you look through the vast amount of court documents that have been made public over the past 5+ years now, that's how long I've been covering these new documents that have been coming out even prior to the arrest, you find out that Nadia Marcinkova, one of his associates that ends up, I believe getting a helicopter's license, and, is very much involved in the ring later on with other people like Sarah Kellen. And there's a couple other names I'm forgetting right now, but I'm going to focus on Marcinkova because in this, in some of the documentation, it says that he went, I believe it was to Yugoslavia, and purchased her as a 12-year-old girl. Now, some people take to the abuse. It's a sad thing, folks, but where do you think serial abusers come from? They're often abused as children, and it's a normalcy that they grow up with and actually like it. People have to realize that, sexual activity usually feels pretty good, right? Like it's not just painful. There's a certain pleasure. And when you're young and you're associating that pleasure with something very dark that's happening to you and you don't understand it's dark, sometimes you take to it. Let me give you an example using Hastert. Just so everybody understands, one of Hastert's accusers, his brother, is Hastert's 30+ year assistant that lives with him.
Wow.
So I'm going to say it again. One of the people that accused Hastert of sexually abusing him as a child, his brother lives with Hastert, who again still is portrayed as a married man and a Christian man.
Yeah. they show him in the wheelchair so we can feel bad for him, just like they did with Weinstein. Yeah, and Mar-a-Lago though is where Virginia Roberts Giuffre was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell initially, right? Through the locker room.
Yeah, a lot of the documentation there shows that her father was working at Mar-a-Lago, was one of the lead chefs, if not the head chef, I think, at the time. And he actually had like a letter from Trump commending him on his work. And there are people that speculate that was the final instance with him and Epstein. That's where he broke it. There are other people that have reported that the Epstein Trump relationship actually ended over a business deal. I read it all, right?
Yeah. Look at everything.
I look at it all,
Me too.
And I think that's important. You can't look at it through a conservative or liberal lens or a Democrat or a Republican lens. You have to look at it through the lens of a military industrial complex operation that is not just about child trafficking, but also controlling any type of political behavior that may be adverse to the agenda.
Yeah, I mean, remember in 2006 down in Florida when Colonel Bob Bowman got the nomination to be a member of Congress, and he gave a speech and he was talking about how even as the nominee, to be a congressman, they were trying to get him to go to these parties and offering him anything he wanted, and that included drugs and underage children. And of course they're going to film that and then be able to hang that over everyone's head. So, I mean, that's what he was saying. I mean, he was the nominee, I think, for the he was running as a Democrat down in Florida.
Yes,
he was running. So, I mean, I have no reason to believe he was lying about that.
And Bob Bowman, by the way, not only came out for 9/11 Truth when almost nobody would and challenged Sean Hannity on his show, but he was a part of the Star Wars program.
Under Reagan, in the 80s.
The Strategic Defense Initiative program that most people are still unaware of, that began to militarize space in the early 80s. And now we're on the 4th or 5th generation of space warfare that's still not talked about in this country, despite the fact the head of the Russian space agency saying, oh, by the way, we've got weapons in space, and if you want to fuck around and find out, we'll nuke all your NATO nations in 30 minutes. How would you like that?
God. Yeah, it's the whole thing's horrific with the idea of a nuclear exchange, because nobody wins. But how about our generals and some of them saying, we could win a nuclear war. We might lose 10, 20, or 30 million people, but we could still win it. Well, those are the people who are in charge.
I'm glad that we're talking about nuclear power, because it's another way to get into the Bohemian Grove. I believe this is volume 8 of the Annals. I've got 8 full volumes right next to me.
Are they not meeting? Are they meeting, Jason? Are they doing it right? They're there right now?
I think it's right now.
You think Kissinger's there? Who's there?
I would imagine. I would imagine a lot of people that are maybe on some of these MAGA tours. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if
General Flynn.
I don't know about Flynn. Flynn's a tough one, man. My girlfriend recently interviewed Flynn, and I got to write a lot of the questions.
Nice. Oh, that's cool.
I haven't spoken directly to Michael Flynn yet. Michael Flynn did see my presentation on space warfare, Elon Musk, transhumanism. Clay Clark says he was impressed. My next presentation is now coming up on the 12th and the 13th out in New York. They canceled the Rochester venue. I think we're in Batavia now. And I'm going to be bringing up the Bohemian Grove. And why do I associate nuclear power with the Bohemian Grove? Well, it was actually meetings at the club and then the Grove that led to the Manhattan Project.
That's right.
And really what the modern day model of the military industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about uses. It was compartmentalization. It was circles within circles with need to know. And it was that model that Eisenhower saw firsthand. And at the Grove, by the way, I'd encourage people to, if you can get a copy of it, it's pricey. It's like a $200 book. Daddy didn't pay $200.
I need to get that, Bermas. I do want to read that. You've told me about that one.
Man. I was so lucky. I think I got this for like $15.
Oh wow.
It was something wild. I was so happy when it came and it had the nice sleeve on it. And I think it was pretty sure it was in a library at some point. But yeah, exactly. Here it is. I got the little library card at the end of it.
You can get the guy from Spinal Tap and Colin Powell to autograph it for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a $6 price tag. Decatur Public Library out of Decatur, Illinois. This is hilarious. But you can see the no trespassing sign, and there's the journalist on it. And so Eisenhower sees up close how this works, and he's the only one to really warn us about it at that level. And he talked about the spiritual aspect of it. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this, because it's not only a model of compartmentalization and things now becoming born need to know. If you read Area 51, again, that's where Annie Jacobson says an executive with an executive. When they break out some of these aircraft, Lyndon Baines Johnson had no idea they were even working on these programs, right? So a lot of people like to say that the owl is a representation of Moloch. It is not. Even though it may be a ball type Moloch ceremony with the cremation of care, which is represented as a human effigy or a baby that's rode in. What they're doing is they're illuminating their little, they have like this, it looks almost like a genie's bottle, but it's really like the eternal flame. It almost looks Olympic. I showed it. In fact, I'm wondering if it's on any of the covers here that you can actually see it.
So the big tall F, the thing that they have at the altar, that's not an owl.
No, it is the owl.
Okay.
So the owl's in front.
Yeah.
And then they have this little like it's golden and it's shaped almost like
a flame.
Yes. And they light the flame. So they carry the flame in, and this is the flame of illumination as they disregard their care, and their great deity is in fact the owl. And that owl was brought to us by George T. Bromley, who's known as Uncle George, and was the high priest of Bohemia for a long while. Now, there are pictures of Bromley pre-owl in druidic garb with other members in front of a large Buddha statue, which they eventually get rid of, right? And this guy, if you can get a hold of this book, I would encourage you. I think you can get, it comes in blue or red. It's hard to get hard copies, but you can find the PDF. And he writes an entire chapter about the Bohemian Club here and other people that are in this. And by the way, this actually has, he was so big with them, Bohemians honor best loved man. This is actually a news clipping that came with my book. Someone had
cool
in there. So cool, right? You can see how long it had been there. That's a blank page of paper that it just kind of dusted up. And in it goes over the ritual of what a new initiate has to do and talks to the high priest over it. And it basically says, look, you're going to keep your mouth shut. You're not going to tell other people about this stuff. And then you can join the club. And, you have to work towards these goals for us Bohemians. And our great deity is the owl. And the owl is chosen because it can see in the night. It's wise. It's a predator. And in Mesoamerican culture, it also represents death and destruction, doled out by these folks themselves. I believe it may be this one. Is this the artwork of Bohemia? I won't be able to, I need to mark it. Yes, I believe it's this one right here. And in here, we've talked about St. John of Maple Nook. There's just a ton of artwork in this, right?
Yeah.
And it talks about how the members of this are really the middle class of, these predators. So right. This is where they're bringing in a lot of their minions. They basically overtook what was, and there's another really good old school picture of the owl.
Oh, there's the owl. Yeah. I mean, that's got to be from the 17 or 18 something.
This thing is amazing. I'm so lucky and blessed to have this thing. And this is now something that I've been collecting these things. There's the Christmas dinner at the club, and there's the owl for 15 years. And I think I started out when I was working out in InfoWars, and InfoWars has one. I won't open it because I have mine sealed. So I had the one from InfoWars. I'd scanned a bunch of the stuff in. I bought a couple more. I used those in my film. For instance, the pictures of the Faustian plays and the fact that all these guys are in drag and that no women are allowed. And
yeah, they love dressing up in drag. I think that's where Monty Python got it from. Maybe they watched They watch some Bohemian Grove, and some people who do write about it, or attendees who have been asked, try to downplay it and say it's just blowing off some steam in the woods. But these people, or at least some of them, really do take the Druidic ceremonial part of it very serious, wouldn't you say?
Well, that's why the Franklin scandal is so important, right? Because it gives you one of those, side rituals that takes place at the Grove and not in front of the thousands of people. And
Right.
just the fact that the cremation of care itself is a ritual in which you're supposed to relinquish all of your guilt over the last year of what you've done, and now frolic in Bohemia, and weaving spiders come not here. In other words, don't come with anybody else's agenda but our own. We're here for each other. Should give people haste. And then you look at the plays that they do, and again, some of them are a little bit more jovial, but I would point people if they're looking for something Hollywood, in the direction of The Good Shepherd. Because
I recently rewatched that. De Niro put some stuff in there, man.
He put a lot in the very beginning.
The Follies, yeah.
A lot. He put Deer Island in the beginning. If people don't know what Deer Island is, there's a scene in Deer Island where they're not in drag, but this would be a retreat where a lot of the Skull and Bones men would go after. Yeah, they would go after they were Skull and Bones men, and Skull and Bones is not a fraternity in the normal sense. Most fraternities are looking for young blood. Like, they're like, let's get the freshmen, let's get as many people as we can, we'll bring them in. You're not allowed to be Skull and Bones tapped until you are a second semester sophomore. Okay. And then they bring you in, and then basically you have your junior and senior year to do what you can, and then you go off into the world. And the reason they show you Deer Island, and they show you, and by the way, when Matt Damon's character is tapped to join Skull and Bones, he's in drag. He's in drag for the college, right? So he's in drag. They tap him. He wants to be a part of that. They even show you during this the ritual in which you're in a coffin, talking about your sexual past, supposedly masturbating, but they show basically the party that's going on around, and somebody's dressed up in the quintessential death outfit of Skulls and Bones, and they're having a good time peeing on the initiates from like the second level balcony. But the reason I bring this up is because this is where the CIA is built out of. So again,
William Donovan,
post World War II. They were looking for secret societies and intelligence networks that were more of a traditional sense, that were modeled after really the British model. And that's what Skull and Bones was. It was like this little intelligence network. And that's why they started it there, because the OSS, post-World War II, and Skull and Bones are really the driving force for what will become the CIA.
Right, exactly. And I love around the 2004 election, I don't know if you can still find these clips, but it was Tim Russert who asked George W. Bush and John Kerry, who were both running for president at the time, about being members of Skull and Bones, which they both were. And they both pretty much gave the same answer. Bush is like, well, it's a secret. I can't talk about it.
Secret I can't talk about. Bush handled it better than Kerry. Kerry was kind of taken off guard. I actually played that earlier this week when I did my Bohemian Grove Weaving Spiders Come Not Here. I played that section of Invisible Empire. So if you want to find those folks, listen, you got a lot to get through in Invisible Empire. I spend like the last 10 or 15 minutes before you even get to Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove and all that other stuff. But when we do play that clip of Russert talking to both Kerry and George Bush about it. And, Kerry...
Russert's face.
Kerry himself goes, there's all types of secrets, Tim, and nothing I can talk about.
It's a secret. The best, though, is Emmerich confronting David Gerken about it at the RNC. I mean, that's one of the all-time greats, man. I would love to talk to Alex just about his time at Bohemian Grove and all that. He's kind of opened up a little bit more about it in some recent podcasts. When he was on Flagrant 2.0 with Andrew Scholes, he really went into it more, but I'd love to have him on to talk about it sometime, because I've always been so fascinated by that, and how he got. Like
there's a lot that he didn't say in the very beginning because of John Ronson's involvement, and I'm not really clear whether or not Ronson went in with him and Mike Hansen. He denies it. John Ronson denies it. Alex has alluded in the past that maybe that's not the case. But for those that don't know, John Ronson, who's an author. He was also doing a book at the time that was turned into a mini series called Secret Rulers of the World. And the mini series actually, they made quite a few movies out of this stuff. The Men Who Stare at Goats. If you want the actual account and not the George Clooney account, that's in the one part of the 3-part series, The Men Who Rule the World. The second part is Bilderberg, and it's mostly Jim Tucker, and they get followed in that. And then the third part is the Bohemian Grove and Alex Jones. And of course, Alex took his footage and did dark secrets inside Bohemian Grove. But I would suggest everybody, instead of watching that film, watch Order of Death. I think it's a very underrated Alex Jones documentary. It's about 90 minutes long, and I think it does a really good job. In fact, you want to see the Kerry and Bush footage and a lot more things around Skull and Bones. Order of Death. I think the vast majority of the DVDs he sells these days, COVID land or otherwise, come with a copy of that if you can't find it online. But Order of Death holds up. Go check it out.
Yeah, it's been years since I've watched that, but I mean, just that footage, just the fact that footage exists that Alex got. If you show that to your regular person who's never even heard of it or understands that this is an annual thing that happens, I think that's a great intro into this whole other world that we don't often see because we're so busy looking at ball games and worrying about living paycheck to paycheck, which is exactly what they want. They want the system to be like that. So, well, we're coming up on an hour here. Why don't you plug your stuff and let us know what you got coming down the pipe? So you're doing a live speech at the Awakening tour or
Reawaken America tour with Clay Clark. And a lot of people in the conservative verse, I guess. He's on tour with Michael Flynn. So General Flynn is a huge part of this tour. Roger Stone has.
So it's MAGA adjacent, you would say?
It's very MAGA, for sure. But what's great about this, and I want to give total props to Mel K, because without Mel K, none of this would have been possible. Mel and I probably butted heads a lot, with the, Q nonsense, or whether anybody was going to be able to come in and save us, or how, well Trump was doing, et cetera, et cetera. And I would stick to my guns. You know what I mean?
That's good. Yeah.
She always respected that. And she put me in touch with Clay Clark. And Clay, to his credit, is an animal. He's actually like a year younger than me. This is a guy with 5 kids. Okay. I recently went to his compound before I spoke at the speech in this personal event where I met a lot of people, people that ran the Epic Times. A lot of people were there, and this was like a private thing. And he had converted basically this pole building into a church because he actually does believe in God, and he's not some grifter, and he's not trying to be $1 million preacher or anything like that during the COVID thing. And then essentially converted it also into a podcasting office. So I get him on my program, and we start talking, and he immediately starts getting into Trump. And I basically just say, look, I would rather Trump not run in 2024. And, he's kind of taken aback a little bit about that. Well, who would? And I talk about, well, if we're talking Republicans, Rand Paul is the obvious choice. Ron Johnson's done some good things recently. I think I talked about Mike Lee. And we just had an honest conversation, right? An honest conversation.
Yeah.
He was starting to become aware of not only the Great Reset, but the transhumanist aspect of this, right? So I began playing some of these clips of NASA and Dennis Bushnell and showing him documentation, to the point where when I got him on the second time, in the middle of the interview, he's watching some of these clips. He's like, dude, I got to get you coming here. He's like, can you speak in, we got the one in Myrtle Beach coming up. He gives me the date. I want to have you come. I go, okay, let's do it.
That's awesome.
It is. And the guy's genuine. He's a genuine guy. I think he's coming to the realization that maybe some of these people don't have the best of intentions, that this might have to get beyond the right and left. I've warned him. I said, look, man, I was warning people Bill Barr wasn't your friend. Mike Pompeo's still not your friend. He's on a lot of these tours,
Yeah. I guess a lot of the people in the MAGA world, they just don't, some of them don't want to see that, but a lot of them they're not aware of those connections.
They're not.
Pompeo to Iran Contra to the CIA under H.W. Bush, and obviously Barr's father giving Epstein the job at the Dalton School as a math teacher, even though he never finished college himself. So all these murky connections, so that's great that they're receptive to that, Bermas. I mean,
not only receptive, but let me say this, while a lot of conservatives and right wingers and alt media personalities are still worshiping Elon Musk, I think by like the third time I'd been on the program and mentioned Musk before, that he now understood that Elon Musk wasn't just into transhumanism, but was also behind the mRNA technology. So he was, at least at the one I spoke at, he was just trashing Musk again and again in front of all these, pretty mainline conservatives. So, the guy's got stones. He believes in what he's doing. He lets you name your own price for these type of events. These are events you could easily, 2-day events, you could charge $400 or $500 a seat for, right? No problem, and probably still fill it out. And I think the suggested retail on it's like $120, but you call up and you say you can't afford that, you literally pay your price. And we're talking about venues that hold a couple thousand people. So he's the real deal. Yeah. His heart is in the right place. We don't have to agree on everything. He's given Jason Bermas a voice, right?
Hey, that's awesome, man. I love to see that crossover. And I have a lot of, I'm not a religious person myself, but I have a lot of religious friends. And when I talk to them, they respect that I have a point of view. They've never told me I can't say those things or tried to censor me or call me names. They'll hear me out. I'll hear them out. When I was younger, I was a little bit more, I guess you could say anti-religious or like an atheist, but over time, man, you're just like, man, people are going to believe what they're going to believe. And as long as it's not hurting or affecting anybody and they're not shoving it down your throat, I think it's a great thing, man, if it helps people get through their day.
Well, here's the thing. I think that number one, I'm not here to preach to anybody, but I always say this, if you want to take spirituality and religion out of the world altogether, what do you have left? You have this kind of rigid scientific construct that might as well be a religion.
Well, right? It is, because I trust the science, Jason. I don't know about you, but I trust the science. And Dr. Fauci is the science, and he is my God.
And I'm there saying to people, I don't know what's out there, but I certainly don't like people demonizing others' beliefs. I think religion certainly has its place in society. Sure, there are people that are going to use it to grift, but
like anything,
everything to grift.
Speaking of grift, if you want to support Jackman Radio, we have a Venmo, we have a Patreon. No, and we've, just like you, Bermas, we've spent thousands of our own money doing this over the years, man. Eric and I have had full-time jobs the entire time we've done Jackman Radio the last 7 years, but I'd like to make this my full-time thing. That's why I'm right now for, the next month or so, my schedule is pretty light. So I'm trying to stream every day and, and get it, we're going into a studio space in September. So we're really going to be ramping things up. So, if people like guests like Jason Bermas and what we do, we are on Patreon, and that's, that and Venmo are the best way to support us. How can people support you, Jason?
First and foremost, check out the documentary films for free. Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Shade the Motion Picture. I think they hold up to this day. I think they're all very important. You can watch them for free. I want you to check them out. I want you to share them, and I want you to share the information, right? We're still on YouTube, but it is the other venues out there that are allowing me to be uncensored. So we're on Rumble. We're on Rockfin. You can find me there as well. But really, it's the information. You want to buy me a coffee. We got the links and all that stuff down below. But, just like Jackman said, no one's getting rich doing this. I don't get paid to speak on these tours. I actually end up dropping. I'm about to drive across the country at the end of the month again. We're going to go to D.C., or Virginia, right outside of DC, where my girlfriend lives. And then we're going to go to New York. I'm going to have to get a hotel for a few days. That's not going to be cheap. The gas isn't going to be cheap. I'll probably drop $1,000 to $2,000 of my own money just taking that trip. Totally worth it.
It's important, though. I mean, someone's got to do this stuff, and it's we can't rely on the mainstream media. There's great researchers that are becoming the new media, and a lot of people in libertarian circles are doing a great job with this information and bringing people together who otherwise wouldn't be talking to each other. So it's great work that you're doing, and I appreciate you coming on again today, Bermas, and hope to have you on again sometime soon.
I love you, brother. I love your brother as well. Eric and Mike Jackman are kick ass and take name dudes. You know, we didn't even talk about it when we talked about Ghislaine Maxwell, but I look upon our time together fondly when we went to the Tucked Away and the Ghislaine Maxwell hideout and drove down that dirt road for a few miles with cell service coming in and out. And it was just, again, one of those moments of synchronicity where like-minded individuals are able to get together and at least document a little bit of that history and bring it to a new audience. So I hope that my audience becomes your audience, and I hope your audience decides to check me out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Check Jason Bermas out on YouTube. He's also got a great Rockfin channel. He's on Twitter, and of course we're on YouTube, and Jackman Radio is also on Twitter. And we will, as Bermas says, we love you too, Bermas, and we'll see everybody on the flip side.